So, Summit of Summit, we're doing a follow-up really to the town hall that was about a year ago, and I'm going to start off by showing you this slide. I've used this in a couple other different places at church, so some of you might know the answer. Does anybody know where this bridge is?
Is that the Platte River?
That's not the Platte River.
Is that really qualified as a bridge?
Yeah.
Bridge nowhere? It's not Alaska.
It's not an Alaska bridge to nowhere. Really? Nobody's seen this before? Joe, you think you know? It's not in Mississippi. Everybody gives up? This bridge is in Honduras.
Oh, yeah.
This bridge was built by the Army Corps of Engineers in the 1830s and 40s. It was designed by a Japanese company. And up until the point where this took place, they used to use it as advertising for their architectural engineering company for how to build a bridge that could withstand anything. Because what happened in the 1980s, I think it was, in Honduras, was the country was hit by a hurricane. And the force of the water and everything that came down was so great that it actually detoured the river. So what you have here is a bridge that was built fantastically well. It was built on great foundations, and it actually survived a very tremendous storm, and yet, despite all of that, does it accomplish what it is supposed to?
They didn't build it long enough.
Yeah, they really did build it long enough.
That's like the bridge in Cambodia. They had this beautiful bridge and a block closed. Remember to the island?
Oh, yeah, to the island, yes. Well, except this is different, and then no one meant for this to happen, right? So they planned, they did everything they could with all their worldly wisdom to prepare for any eventuality. No one prepared for the idea that the river would actually move. So, how many of you were here yesterday during, especially, not yesterday, Sunday during the education hour, Dr. Meyer spoke to us? So you heard him echo what I've been saying for a while, which I always love it when that. And that is that the church in America, especially the LCMS, is facing what I would suggest to you is this picture. The LCMS is built on an astounding and appropriate foundation of the Word of God, the Lutheran confessions, and all of our founding documents. All of those things are awesome, perfect. Maybe not perfect other than the Word of God, but they are awesome, beneficial, all good things, and yet we are finding in our culture that despite being built with the best of foundations, that our churches are beginning to look like this. They're beginning to fail to do what they are actually supposed to do. They're not accomplishing exactly what God intended for them. So what I want to do is talk about that as a jumping off point for our Summit of Summit. So if I ask you, what are our churches supposed to do? Your answer is? Spread the gospel. What? All nations. I like the sound of that. Discipling. Now the 11 disciples went to Galilee, to the mountains which Jesus had directed them. When they saw him, they worshipped him, but some doubted. And Jesus came and said to them, "All authority in heaven and earth has been given to me. Go therefore and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, teaching them to observe all that I have commanded you. And behold, I am with you always, even to the end of the age." We usually use this because it's the best summary of the call that God has given. There's certainly other appropriate ones that we can use as well. But at the end of the day, this is actually what God is calling us to do. So part of the things that we've been trying to solve here at Summit as leadership, part of the things we talked about even a year ago at the town hall, is our changing culture around us, and what are the things that the church can do without changing its doctrine, its teachings, its theology, all those things that are the mission. How can we adapt? a new phrase that I sent the elders this article, and now Chris Munson's not here. He keeps quoting it to me. He said it like 18 times since I've sent him the article. You change the method, not the mission. Right? Mission stays the same. The method might look differently. So, I'm going to be doing a little bit of making sure, even if you were at the town hall, even if you watched it recently, that we're all on the same page. So I'm kind of going to be quickly summarizing and talking about some of what was there, but I get to start off with showing you something kind of strange. So at the town hall last year, this graph said SOP from 1987 to 2014, right? We have another year under our belt, which I would like to show you how it went. Wow.
Holy cow.
So, some of the piece in the last year decided that the church management software that we used was didn't do everything that we wanted to in terms of things like integrating with our bookkeeping, with the online giving, lots of different things. And so what we decided to do is we decided to move everything over to a new program called Seraphim. So we spent most of last year, and by we I mean Rhonda and Becky spent most of last year trying to move everything over. And when we did that, it forced us to actually physically move each and every individual in the congregation from one database to the other. Does that make sense? And when we did that, we found out that we have 191 less members than have been reported going back at least to 2002. Now, you probably have what question comes to your mind when I tell you that? That is an excellent question. My answer to that is, we're still not entirely sure. We have, there's been, we had different, we've had different office people doing it over the years, so it could have been just a change in who was doing it and how. Because way back here in this time period, it was just done with an Excel spreadsheet, right? They just keep track of members that way, in and out, that kind of thing. We found one of the records, but only one of them in its history, where the Excel spreadsheet, so if you don't know, when you report to the synod, you tell them these many people came in by baptism, confirmation, profession of faith, transfer. These many people left by transfer, removal, excommunication, death, whatever. And so one of those sheets, and then it goes to a total, right? So, and in the Excel spreadsheet, that particular year, it added the removals. But that was just once, and that only accounted for what, now we're on the left already, 30 or something of the 190, so could it have been something like that year over year? Possibly, we haven't found it. But we eventually reached the point where I said, it is what it is, and we are done trying to figure out exactly how it happened. So, that's the bad news. Do you want to hear the good news? Do you remember last year how what I told you was, from the worldly point of view, one of the absolute best ways to measure a congregation's health? What was it?
Average weekly attendance.
Compared to total members. Total membership, yep. So, in the United States, in mainline denomination churches, they average about 33%. So in other words, you have about 33% of your membership is in church on any particular given Sunday, and that's actually not good. That's bad. Last year, when I was presenting to you, I said, hey, Summit, we're actually above that. We're at like 37%, so hooray. But this year, I'm able to tell you, since the 191-person rapture, Summit of Peace worships 56.5% of its membership on any particular given Sunday. So a couple of different things. Last year's town hall, I told you one of the things that concerned me about this was the gap, right? And now the gap is much less. So that actually is a good thing. Now there still is a gap there, so there's always still a place to go with that. However, if you were at the town hall, you will also recall that everything I presented to you was based not on the size of your church, but on your average worship attendance. Remember that? So fundamentally, everything that we talked about doesn't change. The only thing that's different is that this thing that looked really terribly scary is not near as terribly scary. And we have 191 people who stopped giving. See, that's a joke because they weren't really ever giving in the first place. Yes?
Could you just stop saying, I'm going to tell you a joke now, that would be more.
We can't hear what this question.
Wait till,
So, what is our confirmed and baptized membership now?
so it is 490 something, right? Well, $484 and $402.
That is quite a drop. That's because a couple of years ago, I heard it was close to 700.
And that's correct. Yep. Yep. But it was also incorrect.
Yeah.
So-
Because I wondered then where all the people were on Sunday morning. We were way below 50.
Yeah, I wondered where all the people were on Sunday as well. And now we know that 191 of them were already in heaven with Jesus. That was a joke. So I mean, I have puzzled and already lost enough sleep over this, and I've given up trying to get any farther. So hopefully you can as well. But do you have any other? Like I said, I don't know what other question I can answer much. But do you have any questions around this particular thing?
Can we get our money back from Synod?
No. He asked if we got our money back from Synod, and if you don't know, you pay to Synod and the district every year based on the size of your church. So, anyway. All right, so quickly I'm going to remind you of where we were at last year, Town Hall. One of the things I showed you kind of quickly was the idea and concept that even though churches are institutions that are guided by God and the Holy Spirit, they are also human institutions and so can be guided by sort of what we call social laws about the world. And one of them that they discovered over the years is that as an organization, churches tend to behave like other human organizations in terms of size. So in other words, depending on how they grow, it takes different kinds of behaviors. And so last year, our average worship put us in the category of a medium church, 200 to 450. In the LCMS, it puts us in the category of a large church. How do you feel about that? But in terms of this, we are a medium-sized church. And I'll refresh your memory about some of the characteristics and things about a medium-sized church. In a medium-sized church, your primary circle of belonging begins to be affinity class or program. When we left the house church and the small church, we left behind the everybody knows everybody and that sort of thing. In fact, once you have 2 worship services, that's the day you have 2 churches, right? In effect. And I watched that town hall not too long ago, and if you recall at the town hall, I made fun of Homer and used him as an example, right? Because when Homer goes to second service, he'll go up to the Pretzers and say, hey, are you new? Right? And they'll say, no, Homer, that's actually fine, but that's the reality we live in. So instead, people begin to join for specific things. I like their youth group, I like their music ministry, I like they're close by, whatever the type of things might be. So the affinity class program tends to be where you connect the most. The officers begin to do more of the ministry in partnership with the staff. When you're in a smaller sized church, your board and things are put together and they basically are sort of the oversight for particularly one pastor when you have him. He tends to do most of the ministry. There's still some volunteer positions and things, but as you get bigger and you have more and more programs and ministries, unless you're going to add pastor after pastor, you start to have officers and lay people begin to do more of the work. Your pastor or pastors begin to be a rancher instead of a shepherd. So in other words, what that means is your pastors do a little bit more of teaching people to do things than doing them directly. And I spent quite a bit of time at the town hall talking about that, in particular where it comes to things like having a personal relationship with your pastor. I talked about Pastor Hall's house and how much he did visitation, but it was my belief that at a certain point that maxes out, and there was no way he was ever going to be able to, past a certain point, visit everybody, right, kind of thing. And so some of those things had to change. And so you hopefully can look at our church and look at lots of different areas where you can say, yes, I can see where the pastors tend to be ranchers now more than they used to be shepherds. Growth happens a couple of different ways. Growth happens by your multiplication options. That means more different classes, different groups, different services, different ministries. But this is also the area where you need to increase the quality of the things you do. And this is one of the harder for many churches to get past. I'll explain it quickly. When you're a smaller sized church and down, what tends to happen is Grandma Schmidt at church, who always used to sing those solos, is getting older and older, and now her voice cracks and things like that. But we all know Grandma Schmidt because she's been at church forever. She taught Sunday school. We love her, and we don't care because she's worshiping Jesus. But now you get into where the church is larger, and not everybody knows who Grandma Schmidt is, and part of the people say, why is that lady up there making that noise? And if you have lots of visitors, you have visitors come by and say, what in the world is she caterwauling about up there in front of everybody, right? It's just the reality of how it is. It works with your pastors too, right? Where you're a pastor in a small church, your people tend to, because they all have a personal relationship with you, they tend to be forgiving of things like your preaching, right? And I was in a small church, and I can tell you this. When you've been with someone at the bedside, when someone's dying, all that sort of stuff, when you've been through the hardest parts of their life, they give you more grace when you are a terrible preacher, right? It's just, and that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But the reality is that as you grow, these things have to grow with it, or you'll be stuck. It's one of the truths as an organization. So, questions, reactions to that? Shouldn't be new. It should be refresher for most of you if you were here. So, according to size dynamics, it says that to move from a house church to a small church, you have to do some of 6 things, and then to move from a medium church to a large church, you have to do the rest of the 6 things, right? Do you remember that from last time? So there's 6 changes you have to make to eventually move from being a small church to a large church, but you don't have to do them all at once. You can do them in stages, right? And these were the 6. Multiplication options, add staff, change your structure. You got to be really intentional about your assimilation and communication. Assimilation is how you bring people in to your church, not just how they come to your door, but how they actually join you. You have to have a change in leadership style, and you need to have new facilities. So if you recall, I pointed out at the town hall, we went through and I said, there were multiplication options that took place. For example, I pointed out in the timeline when you went from 1 to 2 services, and you saw the jump in membership and attendance. We pointed out when you added the expansion, right? And we saw the same sort of thing. You did do a bylaw change at one point. It wasn't a huge structure change. Assimilation communication was different than it is now. Leadership style was different. And then you've got facilities. Oh, and I said staff before, didn't I? So we added staff. I showed you where we added the pastors. Also showed you where we added the buildings. So a couple of these we are considered done, and they are what we did in order to get to a certain size. And what I presented you at the town hall was the ones that needed to be addressed, in our opinion, are these remaining ones. And now I'm going to tell you what we are going to do under each of those categories in the near future. That makes sense? It only took us 25 minutes to get that. 20 minutes, because it took you guys 5 to get ice cream. But we're caught up now. All right, let's start with the first one, multiplication options. Our first thing that we did under this area is small groups. And to begin, we added the life groups. We are on the 5th iteration of life groups. We had a beta test that nobody, we didn't publicize, we just asked people as a trial, and then we've been doing it, we're on our 5th one. If we are successful, we're going to have between 10 and 12 life groups for this summer. If we end up having 12 that are full, we will have, well, I'll let you do the math. How many people will we have in Bible study? 144. So, just to kind of back up and explain. When we stopped doing the Thursday night Bible study, there were some people who were upset and not particularly fond of that decision, and that's understandable. But if you recall, one of the things I tried to explain at the time was that if we actually started to teach our lay people to lead Bible study, then we could grow exponentially in terms of how many people were in Bible study at a time, right? So we would have Sunday morning Bible study, we'd have a couple during the week, we'd have Thursday night men's Bible breakfast as an example. Men's Bible breakfast continues, our Sunday morning continues, but now instead of 30 or 40 on Thursday night, if all goes well this summer, we'll have 144, right? So that's kind of behind in what we're thinking. We also think a couple other things. I don't know if you've ever thought about it. If you Google it, you can find all kinds of different places in the Bible where we see Jesus doing interesting things. We see him doing public teaching, right? He goes in the synagogue and teaches. He stands on a mountain. He teaches a bunch of people. Sometimes there's a smaller crowd around him, like at the Sermon on the Mount and things like that. Sometimes he sends 70 or 72 disciples. But other times he brings just the 12 to himself, right? And he teaches them much more intimately and one-on-one. And in fact, even beyond that, sometimes he asks 3, right, who are named. Yeah, you guys are good. That's Peter, James, and John. And so here's an example. Jesus said, taking the 12, he said to them, "See, we are going to Jerusalem, and everything that is written about the Son of Man by the prophets will be accomplished. For he will be delivered over to the Gentiles, will be mocked, shamefully treated, and spit upon. After flogging him, they will kill him, and on the 3rd day he will rise." But they understood none of these things. This saying was hidden from them. They did not grasp what was said. So I share this with you to kind of open our eyes and make us realize that while Jesus did lots of public ministry, he discipled his disciples intimately and in small groups. So this is what led us as elders to decide that small groups were really healthy for a church once it gets above a certain size, right? When it's small, it is a small group, right? Or it operates in small groups. But once it gets above a certain size, we need to be more intentional about it. So this is what led us to start doing the small groups. And just a couple things to remind you of the goals of those. Our goals for our small groups are to grow still in our knowledge, right? Everybody studies a topic based on the Bible. It can be the Bible itself, it can be a book that talks about Christianity, the Bible, all those things. We want to grow in our knowledge. But we also wanted to accomplish assimilation, right? We want new members to be able to be kind of brought into the body in a way where they get to meet new people, right? And so, just to give you another example of a change we made, we always used to run here at church. We'd have Sunday morning or some other time, we'd have a big class, right? We'd say, hey, there's a new member class, come to this class, and then that class would be full of new members. And then they would join, and that was good. But what Pastor and I realized eventually was that we're adding to the pool at Summit of Peace, which is 484 people. We're adding to a pool of people that we're trying to convince that small groups are awesome. Right? So we're making that number bigger and bigger all the time. And so we said, well, what if we said, hey, a great way to join Summit of Peace is through a small group, right? So we were nervous about it because we knew some people would be resistant. In fact, a couple of couples that did it in my last one, when I first told them that that's how the new member class is going to be, they're like, never mind. But then when the sign-ups came around, they were in it. And guess what about this next round of life groups? Both of those couples are signed up to join, right? So and that's what we're hoping for, right? We want them to experience it as a life group, but then also say, oh, this is actually a really healthy part of our ministry, and they'll try it again, right? So if you've not been in a life group yet, right, and you've been sitting there thinking, eventually this is just a passing fad, and eventually the pastors will leave us alone and that sort of stuff. I'm here to tell you that that is not going to happen, right? My goal is to one day, 100%, every single person in the church in a life group, right? Because we believe this is how discipleship happens. This is how the assimilation happens. And then finally, this is the other part, this is also how we think member care takes place in a really neat way as well. So, just to give you one story, at our last, or I think it was our last iteration of life groups, might have been the fall one, I can't remember now. We knew someone in the life group was struggling with some personal health things or whatever, and so we called her up, we said, hey, can we help you out? Do you need rides? Do you need meals delivered? And she said, no. You know why she said no? She said, my life group is doing that. Right? So that's it, people. That's exactly what it is supposed to be accomplishing. So we are heavily invested and committed to this. This is not a fad. This is what we believe is absolutely necessary for us as a church. Now, just so you know, these life groups are not going to be the only. Eventually, we're also going to do something that is kind of what I'm calling discipleship groups. These groups will be longer lasting. These will be 18 months to a couple of years in which they'll stay together. But one of the goals of this group will be different from the life groups in that one of their goals will be to bring in new Christians. And notice I didn't say new members, I said new Christians. If you read my newsletter article a couple months ago, Rhonda made my cute little picture in it of the church and the river with the bridges, right? So one of the things that I believe is that, and you may experience this yourself, right? In your neighborhood, there are people who maybe you know them well, maybe you don't know them super well, but you do know instinctually that they're not in a place where the first exposure they are going to have to Christianity should be a worship service, right? And so what we believe will be valuable down the road is, let's say there's a group of people that are meeting in a certain neighborhood, because we have a bunch of neighborhoods where we're very dense, right? So these people meet together a long period of time, and over the course of a couple of years, one of them says, I got this neighbor couple that's really struggling in their marriage. I think maybe we'll invite them in. We'll just love on them, right? Tell them about Jesus. They don't have to commit to anything, right? And maybe the Holy Spirit works on them, and maybe they accept. Maybe they even decide to become part of the group or whatever. Maybe one day, maybe it takes a long time, maybe it takes 2 years, but that couple says, we'd like to go to church. Guess what will happen the day they decide to go to church? They will have an entire group of people they already know and love them, right? So this is the importance that we're placing on our small groups and why we're pushing them so hard and are going to continue. So, questions? Yep, we're at 7. He's eating ice cream. Oh.
So how are we doing mixing them up? So in the past, we've seen these where they develop cliques and people don't, they're comfortable, they don't get out of
You're talking about the life groups or disciple?
The life groups.
Yeah, so that's why they're on the semester based. So, trimester, right? So that's why, and so every group that we start knows that they have the option of continuing on, but they get a new assignment. It goes out to every, so they don't just get their whole group back. Part of their group wants to sign up, they can. If somebody else new gets in there, that's great. But every leader is also told that up front, so they know it's not supposed to be like that. But 2, they're also always supposed to be looking for 1 or 2 people who will be a leader. So hopefully they're always having at least 1 or 2 people who are leading no matter what. And that's kind of how we're. That answer?
Yeah.
Good. Other questions about it? All right, who wants to hear about the alternate worship service? Wow, that's a lot less than I. All right, I'm going to give you the results of the survey, and I'm going to tell you before I do that they are not all that helpful. We got 91 responses. We did a first push right around the holidays, Christmas holidays, and we got 40 or 50. And then we did another one this spring, but we didn't, you may have noticed, we didn't advertise that to the congregation. We actually sent that to everyone who, at least according to our records, worshiped 26 or less times last year. Why 26? That's half. You guys are good. So, because our goal, when we originally started talking about alternate worship services, we want to help people begin to attend worship more regularly. And I get it all the time. My new work schedule is for 6 months I'm working on Sunday. You guys know that the various sports leagues, youth activities, all that sort of stuff don't respect it anymore. I don't know if you know this, but Colorado is kind of a big recreation state. People like go skiing on the weekend, like go camping in the summer, all that sort of stuff. So we start this by saying, can we help our church attend more often? So here's what we got. We asked the question, first of all, what service do you normally attend? And the answers were 47% said we go to the 8 a.m. service, which by our numbers bears out. 10:30 a.m. was 39%. We have 14% of our people who are floaters, which means whoever's got communion, whichever service has communion, that's the one they go to, right? So we ended up with 91 people answering. We had 88 people answer this question. I don't know why 2 people skipped it, but some people are just honoring. We asked them, what is your worship frequency? Do you attend 4 or more times a month? Do you attend 3 times a month? Do you attend 2 times a month? Do you attend once a month? Or do you attend less than once a month? And we had 38% of our people say, we worship at least 4 times a month, if not more. Dear brothers and sisters here at Summer's Peace, the members of this church greatly overestimate actually how regular they are in worship, because our printout of people who attended 50% or less was pages and pages long. But putting that aside, this is our answer, right? So we got the 38% said 4 or more, 25% said 3 times, 2% said half the time, 10% said once, and 7% said we attend as little as possible. Yeah. And we asked them, we said, if you attend 3 or more times, how many of you took the survey? So what you might not know is once you answered how much you attend, you were diverted in your survey to different questions. Because we wanted to separate out the people who attend twice or less. Because those are the people we're trying to help. I don't want to give the people who attend 4+ times a week another option. That's not you're already doing awesome, right? See what I'm saying? So if you took this and you answered it, this is how it diverted, right? And so you'll actually see this is kind of, so 37 people got diverted to the other section how they answered. But anyway, so of the 53, they say we go 3+ times. And we said, would you be interested in an alternative worship service? And they said yes. 72% of them said yes. We said, really? When would you like that? And 48% of them said, we used to be Catholics, so we would like it. That's only half a joke, because I don't know if you've ever seen, but Summit of Peace is truly Catholic-like. I mean, there's a good 60% of our families, one of them used to be Catholic, right? So Saturday evening, 48%, 34% said Wednesday, and then 18% who hate the NFL football on Sunday night said, that's when we want to go to church, right? We said, well, if you're busy on your normal time, what would be better for you as an alternative worship time? And they gave us kind of similar answers. Still Saturday evening was the best. Wednesday was next. Sunday was the last. So that was one side. This is the answers from the 3+ers, right? I've changed the colors to try to help you keep this in mind. Now we're less than 2-a-monthers. These are their answers, right? Technically it's 2 and less, but here's your right. So we had 30 people in this category. We said, the question was this, if you attend 2 or less times a month, if we offered an alternative, would you be interested? And 47% said, well, it depends on when. 33% said yes. 10% said no. We are a member of a church and we don't like to attend. The interesting one is the 10% who said, it depends on what kind of service. Yes, not the when, but the what. We asked, hey, you who only go twice or less, what is the largest barrier to your attending? And here, we really messed up the survey. because we did not give you a place to fill in the blank. Because I thought these three categories would take care of the majority. I had no expectation that other would be so high. And I would love to have known and unpack that, but that's my fault. So, but 24% of them said work is what gets in the way, playing means recreation gets in the way, and then our youth activities said 15. And then the other 41 said it's your preaching that actually is the way. I mean, I would love to know what some of those. Well, these were anonymous. I don't know who to ask. So we said, okay, you who sometimes have a barrier to worship, what is your preferred alternative worship time? And the answer by 59% was Saturday Eve. Wednesday was 34%, and Sunday was 7%. So, as you can see, it's pretty heavily geared towards Saturday evening. The elders have been discussing this, and they are not ready to pull the trigger on this yet for a couple of reasons. One, because we didn't get a great response from the people we actually were trying to ask. Two, because we're torn by a couple of things. One is this. We're not all the smartest people in the world. But if the largest barriers to you going are because you go camping all weekend, you go skiing all weekend, or your kids have youth tournaments all weekend, how does Saturday evening help you have more attendance? So we're a little bit nervous that they're just saying Saturday for the sake of convenience. And I will confess to you, as your pastor, if I attended a church with a Saturday night service and complete sleep-in Sunday, Julie would make me do that. Right?
Make you what? I'm sorry?
Go Saturday night so you can sleep in on Sunday.
I would love to sleep.
Right? Because a bunch of you know, right? How often do you get to sleep in on the weekend? Not very much. So we're struggling over this. The other thing, and maybe we're overthinking it, is this. Saturday evening, you get the same sermon as Sunday. That's easy. Wednesday, we think, well, 9 times a year it's going to be Advent and Lent, so that's going to be a different sermon. But I actually think one during the week, I mean, you guys can kind of tell me what you think, but I don't think it would be unusual for us to actually get people who will go twice a week, right? I actually think we'd be surprised by how many might say, oh, let's go Wednesday again, or whatever. So what we're nervous about with Wednesday is we'd be doubling the work, right? Because now you're another sermon, and instead of 9 weeks a year, that's 52. So these are the results of the survey. As I mentioned, the elders have a goal of pulling the trigger and having something by September, but we're torn up on what exactly that's going to look like. So questions, or you can even give me just your own anecdotal, this is what I think about all that. Or you can say, we're kind of in a hurry, speed this thing along.
I like the Wednesday because of the weekend, possibly out of town youth.
We do crew youth, and I know Lexi does Fusion Youth and, confirmation on that on Wednesday night. So when we get into Wednesday night Advent Lent services, it really impacts that time, although I love Wednesday night. I would think that would be a popular time to come, just because we're out of town on weekends too, but we would have to somehow figure out what the youth.
Yep, that's part of it as
activities
well,
are.
right? Because the Advent Lent ones, our teaching time is actually quite short. We couldn't do that all year. But to be honest, we're also thinking about, we're talking about trying to reach, people who can't come regular. So maybe we don't know, maybe what would happen is, normal every Sunday day, people are coming, dropping their kids off, whatever, and a completely different group of people are going, you know what I'm saying? Maybe, I don't know how many parents would be like, well, my kids are in confirmation. That makes me want to go to church. I just don't. You see what I'm saying? We don't know how to, but I agree with what you're.
Just how that all looks.
I always like a vesper service,
Vesper?
which is a little shorter.
Oh.
The sermon's a little shorter.
Everybody here is for a shorter sermon?
So I just wondered if that would be, the liturgy is different, is there?
Yeah. Well, yeah. And that would be, and this is part of why we're not deciding yet, because we have to decide who it's for. That will help us decide when, and that will help us decide what, right? So we got a lot of moving parts at the same time.
And then if you have communion service,
Yep.
that involves the altar guild also.
Yep, all guild elders, yep,
Yep.
all that.
Talk to all those extra people.
So that's why we're stuck in the mud at the moment. So there's one there.
Are you just targeting people at the church, or are you also targeting outside the church as well?
I asked the elders that question yesterday, and their answer was yes.
So
Did you
how
raise
do
it?
you go like survey with people outside the church?
But I don't know how to do that. We could tackle high schoolers as they walk by.
I was just gonna
I
mention.
mean, it's not bad, I just don't know how we would, yeah.
I was just gonna mention what you just said is, what are you, I mean, you have to figure out who you're trying to target. Are you trying to target the people that are on vacation and therefore they're gonna come in on a different time so that they're not missing something, or are you trying to get the people that are not coming?
Yep, that's exactly right. So,
So I have one other question. Is there any research you can look at to see what other churches have done and what's been successful?
well, the elders brought that up, and so we're gonna start calling the Denver area, because we think they're, they would have a sense of what they, what they struggle with the same things we do. So yeah, so we're actually gonna start working on that. That's part of what they wanted to know before the next elders meeting. We're gonna find the ones who we know do an alternate service and ask them all these questions. So this is partly why the elders are also wrestling with to be honest, who it's for is, it took me a while to totally unpack this, but since I have been senior pastor here, we have had 167 people join our church. 98% of them, at least one of the two, if it was a couple, had a Lutheran connection. Now, I praise God for all of them, right? I don't want anyone to hear what I'm about to say is to say that's a bad thing, because that's a good thing. But that's not making disciples, right? Moving Christians around from church to church is not making disciples. People always, and not always, people very often need to find a new place to grow, and I am elated that they think that we can help them do that, right? So I don't want you to misunderstand me. So that's part of also what we're trying to wrestle with is, if we have an alternate service, should that be on our radar as well?
In fairness, I was in the LCA, so I don't count.
Wait for a mic. You ended up with both of them. Right over there. That still is a Lutheran connection.
No, that's barely.
But it is barely, but it's still Lutheran. All right. See how I made you run over there and then yeah. Okay, so if you have questions, if you'd love, seriously, I would love for you to just send me a quick one-paragraph email and just say, Pastor, this is what we think about the worship thing. It would help us we're really struggling with a sense of it. So, all right. So, hey, come back here. All right, so alternate worship we covered, and then there's some other things that we're talking about. I don't know if you've noticed, but the music ministry here at Summit of Peace is growing. We have St. Stephen, ELCA Church in North Glen to thank for that, because they sent us 2 of their music people years ago, right? And they were tremendous gifts, and they built the music program up. And as happens with lots of different ministries, if you're not growing, you're shrinking. So, we added a part-time position actually directing music. Hopefully you've noticed, but the number one job I gave Katie when she took on, as I said, in my personal opinion, our special music is so great that when it's not there, the service is kind of like. So I gave her the job last year of trying to have it every Sunday, and she's like at 99%. Like there's been 2 Sundays. Did you notice, I hope, that? All right, so that's just an example, right? So our music ministry is growing. We want our faith at home. This is our faith legacy that we had going for a while, but it kind of fell off the radar when we hired the faith legacy coordinator as the office administrator. Yeah, she's like, I'm not doing any volunteer, no, that's not true. She still, I know. She still teaches confirmation, she does lots of volunteer things. I said she couldn't do it anymore if she was, all right, so. But we have other people interested in it and that sort of thing, so we're looking to get that going. We think this is a big and important part going forward. Hopefully you believe as well. And I've had it on my heart for quite a while to get a men's group going. So I'm trying, my experiment with that is to see how men behave in a life group, and then we'll see from there if we can get together more often.
You say men behave at the same time.
It's a relative. So, any responses to that? So that is a program that we do where we do seminars and stuff for parents about how do you do devotions at home, how do you observe like faith stepping stones, their first Bible, their first children's Bible, how do you get them to, so that faith is something that's lived out at home, not just, right? And I actually have used our example in our family, right? Because I can remember when kind of junior high schoolers, right? When you got more serious about doing devotions stuff at home. And the truth is, if you start trying to do devotions, you should still do it, but if you start trying to do devotions when your kids are teenagers, it is the most uncomfortable, awkward, weird, right? It was tough. It was hard, right? So one of the things we want to try to help parents do is get that earlier. So that's what that is. And then the men's room. Other questions? Add staff. We're done with that. Structure change. So we are looking at, and believe policy governance is probably the best alternative for us, simply because if we did something else, we would be one stage away, because once you're a large church, the recommended governance is policy governance. So we're thinking of going through the angst of all this just once. So in the next couple of months, the leaders of the church are looking at actually bringing in a consultant, though, to get his opinion on this. Come look at us. I think I told you at the town hall, but just as a reminder, I talked to 13 pastors who had all done a structure change. 10 of them had tried doing it on their own, eventually failed and hired a consultant, and then 3 just hired a consultant and went on from the very beginning. No one that I talked to has ever succeeded doing it on their own. It's too much work. Pastors sometimes have to preach and stuff, and so that's what we're going to try to do. And then once he gives us some guidance, we'll come to you. Obviously, it takes the voters to approve that, and then we'll come to you and ask for your input. But the background here is this, in essence, that we have many ministries that are going now that are awesome, fantastic, and led by lay people, which is the best thing in the whole world. But every 2 years, we tell them to stop and someone else to do it. And that kills the consistency, the learning curve is too great, all that sort of stuff. So we're looking for help there. Questions on that? Our awesome communication, assimilation and communication. So hopefully you've seen, there's lots of different ways we're trying to communicate now. I believe it's true that we've kept all the old ways of communicating, we've added many more. Sometimes I wonder how well, because for example, last night at the elders meeting, I said, don't forget the Summit of Summit, and half my elders said, what? What's the Summit of Summit? Maybe not half, that might be unfair. So you never know how we're doing, but this is why we're increasing all the different ways that we communicate, everything from bulletin layout to newsletter to emails, all that kind of stuff. And along with it, we did this, as I mentioned, a bridge to a new church management software that is actually online based, and eventually every member of the church will have access to it. So some bad news is that means Courtyard is going to go away. But the good news then, it will go to this site where everything is there, right? So for example, things like, it was really, really slick. So when we were planning life groups, we went to our program and said, hey, show us a pin where everybody lives so that we can decide where we should have our geographic ones, right? And it went, and we're like, okay, we want one there, we want one there, we want one, right? And so it's going to be really handy. It's going to be helpful for you. You're going to be able to have your own login, and you'll be able to track your giving week to week, your attendance, all these sorts of things. It helps us with that. When you go to the home page, it says, size of your church, how many members, baptized, visitors, all kinds of, it's really cool. So it's got lots of great things. It even has a devotional reading plan on one of the tabs, right, that you can do so. But even more importantly, it helps us with a couple of things. It's really useful and it lets us create workflows. This is kind of a businessy term, but for example, we in essence created a program within it that says, when we add a visitor, we tell you we just had a visitor this Sunday, it starts a thing for us that says along the way everything that we want to do, right? So after one visit it says, don't forget you want to do this. And if they come back a second time, don't forget that again you're going to do this. And if they come back a third time, don't forget you're going to do this, right? So it's really handy in helping us keep track of our visitors and things like that. We also created one for our delinquent workflow. Pastor Allshouse had this pretty specific in his mind anyway, but it was really operated purely on however well he and Deb to start, and then Rhonda and I sort of kind of like, how long has it been since we've seen this person? I'm not sure, let's look, and that kind of thing. Now we have a workflow, right? And when you do this 3 in a row, the computer says, hey, somebody should call these people. Yep. And it's really slick because we can do things like, oh, yeah, we know they're, that's the Phelps, they were in Vietnam for whatever, and then we say, remind us however long ago, right? So workflows for that. But it also helps us create workflows for our engagement. So one of the things that I believe, our elders believe as well, Pastor Roberts, all of us, is that, you've heard me say this before, you measure what matters, right? And so one of the things we want to see is that we want to have our people engaged in healthy ways in here in the community, in their families. Then we need to figure out ways that we, in essence, track that, think about that. So we've actually created what we call a discipleship process, right? So what this means is, this is kind of a crass way, but just grant me some grace on this. Joe Blow visits with his wife, Jane, and they visit because one of them has a Lutheran background, one has a Catholic, and they know that's where all of them, this is where all those people go. Right? So they come to visit, and they say, we're going to join, right? And now, as spiritual leaders of the church, we believe it is healthy for us to think about, what does Jesus want us to do with them, right? Jesus doesn't just want us to have them show up to church and just give money, right? He wants them to grow closer and closer, trust in Him more and more, but we also know that that faith and that trust should, even though they're fallen, broken people, lead to a life that is more and more disciple-like along their life, right? Does that make sense? Everybody kind of understand? So, how many of you have ever heard us at Summit refer to things as grow, share, live? That sound familiar? Hey, we're also using that as our discipleship process. So in other words, the way that most people will connect with us is in our grow area. These are our large group things, right? You're going to come to our worship service, maybe you'll stick around for our Bible study, maybe you'll want to send your kids to our Sunday school program, right? And that's the easiest way that most people engage, right? That's where they start. In fact, we still have large numbers of our church who unfortunately are still there. The only thing they've ever done here is go to church on Sunday, right? And that's a good thing. But we believe we want to move them along in sort of a discipleship process. And so the next thing we want them to do is to move into the sharing, right? Where we're thinking primarily about our groups, right? You're sharing your faith and your gifts among the community of believers. And so we've listed life groups, but we have other groups, right, that operate here as well. And those are legitimate and healthy things, right? So you move beyond just sitting on the pew on Sunday to the setting that we believe discipleship happens. Remember we talked about this a little while ago? And now you're in the discipleship area, right? And this might take a while, but you're with other Christians, they're helping encourage, feed your faith, you're learning more, so that eventually what should happen then? Your life should look like it, right? So then it moves you to live out your faith in constructive and helpful ways to the body of Christ, both within and without, right? And so that can look like serving us on Sunday morning and throughout the week, but also serving our community, right? So our goal is to have people move in a process towards discipleship and help. So the elders created this. Well, the elders came up with the stuff that's on there. Rhonda made it really cool and fancy looking. And eventually now after this meeting, you're going to see posters of this around, and we're going to make use of it as a reminder of what we're trying to do. Julie's giving me the nod to pick it up.
It's not what it was.
So, the other part of that equation, though, is yes, people may be moving along in the process, but how do we know that they're growing, right? So, the Bible talks a lot about what we are terming as marks of discipleship. So, in other words, you can see, especially when you read the New Testament, ways that the people grew. How many of you have ever heard us use grow, share, live here at Someone of Peace? Raise your hand. We're doing the same thing. Out of thanksgiving for everything God has given them in Jesus Christ, disciples of Jesus Christ at Summit of Peace humbly strive to help everyone grow in their knowledge and trust and commitment to the Lord through worship, Bible study, and giving. Share their faith with the people in their lives, especially encouraging and supporting the family of faith through life groups. And 3, live out their faith in ways that visibly and physically share the love and mercy of Christ with their family, friends, community, and world through vocation, service, and outreach. Right? So when a church is small and everyone says, hey, what are we here for? And you say it's to make disciples, everyone knows what that means. But when your church gets to a certain size, not everybody's on the same page of what that means. From here on out, when we say we're making disciples at Summit of Peace, this is what it means.
Is that going to be around too?
Yep. Chris Munson already promised us his gigantic printers that he has at work. We're going to like wrap the whole building. All right. The next thing we need is we believe is the leadership style. This takes us back to the rancher things that I talked about. So for example, our Stevens ministry. We have lots of people who are dedicated, have been trained at Stevens Ministries, Stephen Ministry over the years. It's a fantastic and awesome ministry, but it's one that we're still kind of struggling with. I've used it in sermons, I told you this before. I'll call someone who's dealing with something, I'll say, hey, how you doing? Whatever. At the end of the conversation, I'll say, would you like to talk to someone regular about this? And they'll be like, yeah. I'll go, good, I'll have the Stevens minister call you. And they're like, oh, no. We thought you were gonna. Right. Well, if our church is large enough that even if both of us did that, that's all we would do. And that's just the reality. Now, number 2 is this, and I mean this with all sincerity. Most of the time that someone comes to talk to me, they do all the talking, I do all the listening, and they already know the answer to almost all their questions. That's the reality. And there are people in this church who are just as, if not better, listeners than we are. And that's what your Stephen ministers are at the heart of it at the end of the day. Don't do that. Don't do that.
Yeah, it's still tired.
Yeah, sorry, you're done. All right, so we want you to really open your heart to this ministry. We're talking about this as much as we can because we think it's a really, really important part. Why? I'm going to move on. You're just going to have to believe me about what the slides say. All right, so the next thing on the slide says member care. And under it, I have 4 categories: hospital, homebound, shut-in, rides, and meals. So almost all of those things, especially the rides and meals, are things that we have done formally or informally over the years. Miriam did meals forever and ever, right? Well, we do funerals as well, but something's going on, hospital, something traumatic. Would it be helpful if you didn't have to cook? And we would provide them meals. And we think that's a good thing. But again, as we grow, we think it's something that should be kind of coordinated, right? Rides as well. My favorite story of this is that Martha Lightfoot, when she went into her assisted living, we said we would work on getting her rides to church. And people had said on their time and talent sheet, we'll provide rides. And so we printed it off, and I showed her. I said, we got all these people do it. She grabbed it, went home, and she just started the first week. She called the first person on the list and said, you're supposed to give me a ride on Sunday. You're one of them, right? Yeah, and that's how it sounds, right? You're supposed to give me a ride, and that's awesome, right? I actually love that. What's that?
It's a remote controller.
Hospital. I talked about this in the town hall, but this is where we're at. There will always be an occasion for your pastor to visit you in the hospital. And the truth of the matter is that the worse that things are, that's what we're paid for, right? something traumatic, heart attack, you've lost a loved one, someone's really hurt, all those sorts of things. Your pastors are always going to be the ones that handle it with you. But again, we're growing big enough to where if this is your fourth knee scope, we might not be the one to come and pray with you beforehand. If we have time, we still might. But if you're recovering for 2 weeks in the hospital, chances are someone else can do just as good a job coming and checking on you every once in a while. So we're looking at training a group of people. This is different. It might overlap, but it's different from Stephen's ministry. Just a group of people who are comfortable going to visit people in the hospital. And we have people who do this anyway, right? They just go, they hear somebody's in the hospital and they visit them, and that's awesome. But again, a formal way to think about this. Homebound and shut-in, we want to do the same thing. Pastor and I will always do the communion visits, and we'll do them as frequently as you can, but the truth of the matter is this: as much as our people love the body and blood of Christ, at least half the time they call us and say, Pastor, will you come over for communion? What they really mean is, will you come over and visit me? Because they're lonely, right? And so we think we can actually help them quite a bit if we had people who would do these things. So we're trying to, Becky Gann at the moment is helping organize. In fact, she handed me 18 pages, legal-sized printout Excel spreadsheet of all the organizing she's already done. So I'm going to be reading it all day tomorrow, but that's, when you assign her something, this is what happens when you assign a former, what was your rank when you got out? You're not going to tell me?
I just want to get your boss.
Okay. So we're trying to get this organized in a formal way, right? So that we know these things take place, all that kind of stuff. So what it means is we have to have the people. We all have to begin to adapt and have this be okay, right? You have to open your heart to this kind of ministry as well. So questions about that? Now, finally, you'll see that I said we don't need new facilities, but I have now in parentheses updated facilities. Now, I don't want to freak anybody out, but the truth of the matter is this. And it actually goes back to what I was talking about before. The climate in America is this demographically. The second largest generation in its history is moving into retirement and will be aging and going to nursing homes, all these sorts of things. Behind it is one of the smallest, and then after it is actually the largest. But these are millennials and they're worthless right now. I just had to, I'm sorry. But that means that you have this little tiny generation in the middle who are taking care of 2 generations that are ginormous. So it means a number of different things. That's one of the reasons why I talked about the last one. But the other is this. I love our building. I am not trying to be critical at all. But we are very close to the day where we need a portico and a way to not only park and get in the building, but there's no ramps, there's no, right? I mean, our population of our church is aging, that sort of thing. And I think there's just some things like that we have to do. I'm not talking about building a whole new campus or anything like that, but I do think we're not too far from having to do some things like that, just so you're aware of that. That makes sense. And if we're going to do that, then we might as well have another wing of and that gigantic covered parking place for the senior. But does that make sense? So yes, facilities is done, but is it ever really? I do think we're approaching at some point that, which is why you've maybe over the last couple of years been annoyed with my. I whipped the stewardship board to try to help us get the debt paid down quicker so we can borrow more. No, not. But really, we have to get our debt paid off before we can talk about doing this. All right. Questions? Have I answered them all along the way, or are you just so tired of this, so full of ice cream, you're ready for a coma nap? Yep, over here. I'll take one. Start walking around. I'm not taking it to him.
The only comment I want to make is that I've heard it described that you invite somebody to a Lutheran worship, and there's all this standing up and sitting down and doing all this stuff. It's very confusing to people. So I'm not sure that we should have, if we have an alternate service, we should have it specifically for new people because they would have the same issues. I think the discipleship groups are the best way to bring people into that way they can learn how the worship works and so on before they go into it. So I'm not sure you can design a worship that's going to attract 100 people from the neighborhood. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. You are not going, you're not going to, and neither would it be the goal, right? You don't ever, worship is not primarily for attraction, and you're not going to attract unbelievers for that. That is correct. I guess the area I disagree with this, which is that whether we like it or not, the truth of the matter is this. Conservative liturgical worship is not a growth market. Right? And from purely just talking business, the longer that's all we do, that the pool of people that we can bring into our fellowship and be part of reaching people for Christ is going like this. So it would not be for the sake of unbelievers, but the question would be, would I'm going to call them de-churched. People have some familiarity with Christianity, they grew up something, but it wasn't this, and is there a way that is more easily for them to digest? Is that appropriate? And this is what the elders we have decided, this is the questions we're asking. So that would be the one. But I agree fundamentally, worship is not for non-believers. Yeah. So, look, Seth, I'm helpful.
Oh, there's one right
I
Oh, go ahead.
have a question in regards to awesome communication.
The what?
The awesome communication.
Yes.
I don't know how long I've been a member here, it's been a few years now. And honestly, I've only received, I can remember one call from my elder. And that was about 2 weeks ago, asking me if I was going to make it to the 30th anniversary.
Right.
Other than that, the only other communication that I've had is you calling to see if I would be on board. And just the face-to-face communication that I have while I'm here at church or at a life group. I think communication needs to improve more like along the lines of phone calls, emails, or whatever. Personal communication with the members. No, it doesn't have to be a pastor. It could be an elder or whoever. But honestly, the only time I've ever been spoken, or
Yep. So this is what I'll say, and that's true, and we've heard that before. But this is actually part of what actually led us to the small groups and everything. Because the truth matters, all of them have full-time jobs, right? All of them have lots on their plate, and so we just asked, how long is it realistic for that to be the expectation? Right? So what I mean by that is that if because it was the expectation was smaller, and that's not bad, right? You've got regular check-ins from your elder, that sort of thing. But at some point, that's not tenable, right? When we have 1,000 members, are we going to have 150 elder, or whatever you see? Yeah. So we want some of what your elder did to be replaced by your lay. That's intentional, right? Now, the truth of the matter is that part of it depends on. So I've said this before too. The elder's job description is ginormously long, and whenever I find someone who's good at all of them, you know what I do? Guess what I do? Not the president, no. That's if they can't do any of them. What do I do if I find a guy who can do all of the things of an elder?
Suggest a seminary?
Send him to seminary, that's exactly right, and I'm not kidding about that, right? So they all have areas that they help out. None of them do great, right? I mean, I think people in this room would say, my elder sends me birthday cards, my elder, right? Because I know there are some that do it. So part of it is just, and that's just
And in fairness, some guys are good at that.
That's what I'm saying, yeah,
And stuff.
right,
And other guys, it's scared to death to make up.
I'll admit,
Yeah.
I prior to coming to Summit of Peace, I was a lifetime member in another congregation, and I don't think I was ever communicated to from that community, that congregation either.
Right.
I think it's just, somewhere where every congregation can probably grow a little bit is just the personal communication.
Okay.
And that's why when they developed the other methods of Facebook, all those other, so that
one, but it takes away the personal touch.
Right.
That some people need, want, like,
Right.
you
But
know.
once baby boomers and us Gen Xers are gone, millennials don't want any personal. They don't only want you to talk to them by text and, right? You can be honest, tell me. She's gonna. But I do agree, I understand and affirm what you're saying. It's just we're not sure, you know, again, how long is that tenable, so what's that gonna look like? Go ahead.
Is there any plan to add contemporary worship to our existing services, or is that only being looked at in terms of an alternative service?
No, so there's no discussion at the moment to change an existing worship service, and the number one reason is because your pastor has been in churches where they've done that, and he can't do it again without dying or killing someone. I say that tongue in cheek, but the truth of the matter is that people are very personal about their existing one. I believe that contemporary, I'm not speaking, I'm only speaking for myself, but the sense that I get is that one day we will have contemporary worship, but it will be a new service with not changing someone else's. So.
It talks about fellowship in there, and I guess I'm trying to think of what our fellowship programs are now. I guess when I think of fellowship, I think of things that aren't, you know, not necessarily Bible study, not necessarily, you know, service projects, you know, like, you know,
Christmas
service projects are listed there, right? So like more, you know, yeah, social stuff, like softball team, beer brewing, any of those kind of things. Like, so is there any plans to kind of integrate and assimilate that way?
So, let's see so your question is, do we have plans to have what I'm gonna call, similar interest groups, fellowship that are not specifically Bible study or whatever? Is that fair? Yeah.
Or do we have it right now?
Well, no, and we have the hiking group. Does that count? Yeah. What? Yeah, I mean, we do have, I think he's asking about ongoing, right? Like we do we got camp out, we got summer, we'll do a barbecue, we do Christmas parties, we do stuff like that. Those will continue. But things like, I've told this story before because it's one that I love, but Redeemer Fort Collins has a motorcycle club, right? That they started some years ago, and they have baptized a number of adults through that ministry, right? Because it starts as just we're a motorcycle club, people who are not part of the church ride along, and eventually some of them have questions about the, you know, it works exactly like I talked about. That kind of thing you're talking about?
Yeah,
yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
What's the name of that motorcycle?
Just wonders to CMA.
I know Eternal Brothers.
I don't know.
Okay, just curious.
I bet it's on their website.
One of the people that races with us is Bar is a member of the Eternal Brothers, which is a motorcycle group.
Right.
So I was just curious.
Yeah.
Many years ago, 15, 20, we had a co-ed baseball team that played Sunday afternoons right over here at Horizon on their ball diamond. And they played a team from Risen Savior, and I don't know if it was just Lutheran churches or not, but that they did that for 3 or 4 years, I believe.
Yeah. And I, like all those things I think are appropriate. One of the things, that, to be honest, that we're wrestling with is, will those things look like they used to? Because do you want me to tell you the number of churches in the Denver area who could field healthy adults that could play softball at this point? Because I'm sad to tell you that it's not very. So, but that's just my joking way of saying that we've been asked about having a team to join just a Christian area group, right? Not Lutherans, but that's an adjustment for us because we used to only play with them in the sandbox, and so now the question is going to be, are we going to expand? But I mean, I agree. Yeah, stuff like that. Yep. Yes, sir.
No question, but to tie something together, I listened to another Lutheran pastor at a conference
who recounted a story about a young woman in the senior youth group who was in a horrific car accident. And the pastor at the time was 4 or 5 hours away. He was called, he immediately headed back, but was afraid that he would not get to the hospital in time. He did. The young woman was still alive and eventually recovered, but her life group was there. Right? And that kind of ties those two things together, because when you're close with a small group, right, you've got that support mechanism that when your pastor, right, who you expect to be there right away, can't be, right, that support is already in place.
Yep, thanks. Yep. You can't have questions. Now he can be the microphone runner.
He gets the one.
Just to clarify for everyone here, we had a lot put in front of people in terms of what's going on, and it's all good. I'm just wondering if you personally, all the things that we're focusing on, the structure change, leadership style, what are you chomping at the bit at in terms of?
Me personally?
Yes, you.
Yeah.
In terms of.
It's the structure change. Yeah, the structure change. But only because I tell you to chomp at the bit on life groups, because that would be number one. But because that is absolutely vital. But the next one is the structure change, because it is really. I said at the town hall, and I think you all understand what I'm saying, is that when your organization grows, you now need. You get another layer, and we need managers of the doers. And you can't replace the managers of the doers every other year and expect it to continue to go like that. Does that make sense? Okay. And to be honest, they also need a little bit of, they need sort of like, you tell them, you have this many dollars, this is what we're going to accomplish, you can't be arrested at the end of the day, now go knock yourself out, right? Like if you're telling the director of senior youth to do something awesome, you have to give her the resources and the permission. She can't have to come to me every day and say, am I allowed to do this, right? And so a structure change is going to help with those things.
And,
Wait.
No softball for him. It's just a thought of maybe having a spot on life groups to invite somebody.
So this is kind of it's come up this iteration, which I actually love. But here's the thing that we're trying to be just a little bit careful of is that recruiting life group leaders at the moment is not the hardest thing in the world, but it's not super easy. And we're a little bit nervous at this point if we say, hey, I need you to lead, facilitate, do all this stuff, and now you're going to be a missionary. That's why at this point the plan is to have the groups be a little bit different, because we do think that's going to take a certain person who's ready at that point. Does that make sense? Now, if your neighbor's a whatever lifelong Christian looking for a new church, yeah, invite them to your life group. But if your neighbor is a member of Wicca and just sacrificed out on the lawn in the morning, that your life group might not be ready for. Does that make sense? So yes, appropriate. Anything else? We're going to say a really fast prayer and I'm going to let you go. Dear Jesus, we thank you for all of your gifts, all the people here, all of your promises. Help us to be faithful to all of ours as you are to all of yours. In your son's name we pray.